In January of 2018, a headline shocked the U.S. as 13 children in California had been held captive and abused by their parents, David and Louise Turpin. The children were homeschooled, and because of California laws, there was no follow-up on the children's progress, and they were abused so severely that it stunted the children's growth, led to muscle wasting, and left 2 daughters unable to bear children, according to CBS's 2018 report. Homeschooling is not a federally regulated program. The rules go by state. Establishing federal rules would keep kids like the Turpins from slipping through the cracks. So because of extremely lax regulations in certain states, it makes it easy for abusive parents to control their children like the Turpins' parents. After thoroughly researching state regulations and requirements to homeschool a child, I would like to share with you why I believe homeschooling should be federally regulated. In Aslan Davis's 2011 article, The Evolution of Homeschooling, he writes about how homeschooling began and why. In the early 60s, parents wanted to start educating their children themselves for speculation of how well the education system actually was. In 1964, John Caldwell published his book called How Children Fail, describing why the public education system isn't as good as it seems. Homeschooling really became popular in the 70s, and authors published books explaining why the public education system doesn't work because of restrictive classrooms and a less secure environment than at home. So now that I've told you about why homeschooling began, I'm going to explain current state regulations. So every state is allowed to establish their own homeschooling regulations, and certain states have similar rules on follow-ups and assessments. So thanks to the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, I was able to look at each state's rules. So I'm going to show you map by map what certain rules are. So the first is notice that you have to give if you're going to pull your child out of public school and educate them yourself. So gray is no notice, meaning that if you pull your kid out of school, you don't have to contact any state officials about it. And there's green, which is notice, but there's no follow-up about it. Then there's assessment with exceptions, so they require assessments but have various exceptions to it. Moderate, and then thorough. And only 4 states over here actually have a thorough assessment about the child being homeschooled, why, and whatnot. So a few states actually require parents to actually have graduated high school. There are only a few states that you have to have your GED or a high school degree. The rest of them don't. You don't have to have any education, requirements to be teaching your child anything. And then there are academic assessments to provide accountability that your child is being taught and that they're keeping up with their peers that are in public school. Some states do have these assessments and some don't. They can leave out critical subjects like science. So if you don't want to teach your kids science in certain states, you don't have to. They won't learn anything about the earth or how biology works or anything like that. And then half of the U.S. requires assessments to prove that your kids are meeting standards and that you're not just letting them do whatever they want, but the other half does require. So it's proving accountability by requiring assessments of students and academic progress, but there are some exemptions for certain students. I'm assuming this is for students that have special needs and maybe wouldn't do well in the public education system. So most states don't even require don't require parents to keep academic records of their students. So if your kid does actually do these assessments, you don't have to submit it to the state. So this leads parents to not actually go through with the assessments to prove that their child is on the same learning level as their peers in public school, which can lead to a lot these kids slipping through the cracks in education. They're not actually learning and they're being neglected. So in Robin West's academic article from 2009, The Harms of Homeschooling, it captures the harm of unregulated homeschooling. Abuse is one of them because 95% of abuse reports come from teachers or public school officials. So if kids are kept at home with their abusers and there isn't any follow-up or regulation seeing them in their home, then they're stuck at home in their abuse and no one sees them and how they're hurting. The second is because of what we would call severely fundamentalist families that teach their kids certain things, that they develop ethic civility, which is where they're unable to make decisions on their own. They're unable to mature past certain levels that their peers in school can, because they can't make decisions for themselves, and they rely so heavily on their parents that they're not going to make it in adulthood. And then, of course, educational harm. Because certain states don't require you to teach subjects, kids aren't going to be learning at the same rate that their peers in public school are learning. So parents that are religious don't have to teach science because it interferes with their views. Or parents that don't believe in the education system and don't believe in educational benefits. Maybe the parents that aren't required to have an educational background at all, they're not going to teach their kids. They're going to say that they're homeschooling them, but in reality, their kids aren't actually learning anything. Parents' intentions to homeschool may have started as genuine, and because of lax regulations, parents don't actually need to educate their children at all, and it lets kids fall through the cracks. Federally regulating homeschooling would benefit children and protect them from neglect and prepare them for adulthood. So motivate your politicians to do something about this. Iowa is one of the states with the most unregulated system. It doesn't require any notice of homeschooling. Parents are not required to have a basic educational background, and it doesn't require homeschooling kids to submit assessments proving that they're actually being educated. Our future is our children, and what is our future going to look like if we let them slip through the cracks uneducated and neglected?